In short, this poem promotes Victorian corrupt politics, making it both destructive and meaningless. My critique of this poem as both destructive and meaningless may disrupt and hurt your emotions for two reasons. First, Tennyson conceals its ugly nature, the promotion of Victorian corrupt politics with fine clothes and ornaments, which you might call Tennyson's poetic craftsmanship. Second, colonial critics lionize this poem by focusing solely on Tennyson's use of poetic techniques. Either deliberately or unwittingly, they further perpetuate this colonial propaganda in their books and on the internet. The result is the poet enthusiasts from both former colonies and the colonizing countries highly hail or appreciate this poem, while loyally following the colonial propaganda. In this discussion, I will refer to them all as traditional critics. These traditional critics appreciate this short poem with its two tercets, two sets of 3 lines with perfect rhyming, as an ideal portrayal of nature's beauty and liberty. They might say, this poem with its perfectly rhymed tercets shows the physical shape of an eagle, its superpower and royalty. For them, the skillful presentation of meaning matters more than the meaning itself, regardless of how corrupt or spoiled the underlying meaning may be. In contrast, the poem's central action of taking one's life through deliberate planning and scheming can be seen as enough for a human heart to reject the corrupt politics that Tennyson promotes. This is corrupt politics because the eagle, the central character of the poem, uses political and military power for survival while denying others the right to live. Although this might reflect the law of nature, can we generalize such jungle laws to humans, the civilized world? Is that not what Tennyson is doing in this poem? Is he not generalizing the survival of the fittest, this corrupt politics, while misusing or appropriately following Darwin's theory of evolution? Therefore, I prefer to critique this poem from a political perspective rather than an aesthetic or impressionistic stance. It's because I cannot isolate the poem from its author or consider it as a neutral object, as Yasmin, a Sri Lankan English poet, does in her poem, This Language, This Woman. For her, English is a neutral, culture-free language. For me, it's a Trojan horse, a gift where cultural schemers hide, waiting for the right moment. I cannot forget Tennyson's identity and personal qualities. Read Charge of the Light Brigade, for example. When English soldiers massacre Russian soldiers, Tennyson hails the act of killing Russians. One might justify this war if English soldiers were defending their motherland. But it was an offensive war, a war to grab another nation's land. Tennyson's motive was to motivate soldiers to fight for the accumulation of wealth without questioning other orders, even if mistakenly given. He shows no love even for his own working class people, whom the poor soldiers represent. He wants them to do their duty and die for the country, reflecting that he represents the elites and their corrupt politics. In Ulysses, Tennyson motivates both young and old to engage in naval expeditions, to plunder and loot other nations' wealth in the name of exploring the world. Ulysses, or Odysseus, in Homer's epic Odyssey, did not simply engage in exploring the world. He joined the other Greeks in plundering and looting the Trojans' treasures. This reflects how Tennyson uses his creativity. He uses his creativity for hate politics. In his national song, he considers England as the center of the universe, a theme he symbolically presents in the poem we are discussing today, The Eagle. While he may use poetry to show his patriotism, promoting hate politics disguised as patriotism misleads both critics and poetry enthusiasts. With all this evidence from his poems, I can infer his motive for writing The Eagle. It is to justify England's acts of massacring and looting other nations' treasures, and to encourage his countrymen to engage in this corrupt politics. Let's read the poem and see whether this critique is reasonable. He clasps the crag with crooked hands. Close to the sun in lonely lands, ring with the azure world he stands. The wrinkled sea beneath him crawls. He watches from the mountain high walls, and like a thunderbolt he falls. The eagle tightly holds the mountain crags with his crooked hands. Tennyson introduces the central character and setting, helping us understand the eagle and its corrupted power better. The place where he now resides is beyond the reach of others, possibly referring to Victorian England's famous saying, the empire on which the sun never sets. In the first stanza, lonely lands does not mean that the eagle is lonely. It means others cannot reach it. He is like a god in terms of might and power, with no equal. In the second tercet, Tennyson introduces another character, which is feeble and weak in contrast to the eagle. The sea represents nations less powerful in terms of military power. From the eagle's high vantage point, they appear to be crawling. The eagle watches from his mountain fortress and at the right moment falls on his prey like a thunderbolt. Can we consider the eagle naturally as an eagle? Or should we see him as a representative of another power? If we see him naturally as an eagle, we may appreciate Tennyson's poem. However, in poetry and other genres of literature, what we use are not natural, but representatives. They mean more than what we read. In this sense, the eagle in this poem is not just a bird, but an emblem, an emperor. We cannot see his act of falling upon prey as simply that of an eagle. It has a deeper meaning. In this poem, the eagle represents the colonial center, and the sea with crawling waves represents peripheral countries. From his fortress, the center of his empire, he watches the less powerful countries and conquers them at the right moment. Is his act of conquering other countries just? Can he justify this act? Tennyson justifies colonizing countries, looting their treasures, and massacring those who resist based on the theory of survival of the fittest. For his elitist politics, one has the right to deny others the right to survive. Let's conclude our short discussion with an example to illustrate the futility and destructiveness of Tennyson's political stance. Just before the Victorian era began, British colonizers conquered Ceylon, present-day Sri Lanka. What are the weaknesses that allowed the British Empire to conquer it? Was it not civilized? Didn't the country own an established socio-political system which was relatively fair? I should not repeat the answer because the Western colonizers and their agents who distorted our history together with the Buddhist tradition already know the answer. The only reason was that Sri Lanka was militarily less powerful than Britain. Is that a reasonable justification for massacring our ancestors and looting our treasures? During the Victorian regime, British colonizers significantly distorted our history. They altered the landscape of the country, turning, for an example, the area from Tissa Maharama to Pothaville into a jungle known as Yagal. If you are truly interested in realizing the disgusting colonial politics that Tennyson promotes with the poem The Eagle, you may explore this area. In their attempt to reshape our history and portray themselves as civilized, the British colonizers buried a socio-politically and culturally rich civilization in this region. It is this wanton destruction that Tennyson justifies by using the eagle as a symbol of power and Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest to defend his elitist political stance. Therefore, my personal belief is that we, as a misrepresented nation, should apply a political perspective when critiquing poetry written by poets who represent the British colonizers. This approach is an effective way to decolonize our minds.